Okay, this guy here. So we got another fraction, and all we want to do is try and get it equal to a sine squared. So you may look and see a secant squared minus 1, and you may try and go back and look here. Okay, you can get a secant squared minus 1. So you can take this middle identity, and you can swing this guy over. Secant squared minus 1 is a tangent squared. That's one way of doing it. Okay, certainly not the only way. Okay, I would avoid taking the sine squared and putting a 1 minus cosine squared in there until you're sure that you definitely need it. Okay, but I would work with this left side first here. So one way is we could replace it with a tangent squared, like we said. I'm going to try something different. I'm going to put everything in terms of sine and cosine. So a secant squared is 1 over a cosine squared minus 1. And then replace the bottom with the same thing. Now I got the fractions within fractions again, so I'm going to get rid of them. I'm going to multiply every single piece by a cosine squared. And see what happens. Well, cosine squared over cosine squared is 1. This becomes 1 minus cosine squared here. This guy cancels out, and it's just over 1. I know 1 minus a cosine squared is a sine squared, and I am done. Okay, so there's not always just one way to do these. If you want, pause it here and try and replace this upper piece with the tangent squared and see if you can get that guy to work as well. Okay, it's a simple little fraction within fraction type thing. Okay, but I just did it that way to show you a different way. Last one here. Okay. You got fractions, okay, no Pythagorean identities. Notice they're all to the first power here. You get a 4 tangent and a secant over here, okay? So this is about one of the more difficult things you can do with these. So maybe I'm going to take this side right now and just do this. Clearly I'm going to have to do something to that left side. Not 1 over a tangent. Tangent is sine over cosine. Okay, secant is a cosine. So I actually didn't make that any easier on myself. So I just turned this into 4 sine over a cosine squared. Okay, so obviously we're going to have to do something this left side. So maybe we're going to try and get it equal to this. Maybe we're going to try and get it equal to this. The big thing is you can't be going across equal signs. You got to keep each side completely separate. When you see something like this left side here, my suggestion is common denominators. There's no replacing we can do. So yeah, you could take a sine and write it as 1 over a cosecant, but that's counterintuitive to the hints I said. Okay, try and get things in sine and cosine, not change them out of sine and cosine. They're not squared, so you can't use any Pythagorean identities. Okay, my suggestion, common denominators. Common denominator clearly would be this guy and this guy. So this guy here is missing a 1 plus a sine all over a 1 plus a sine. Okay, so it's like the rational stuff you guys did in college algebra and a little bit in algebra 2. Okay? I'm going to get rid of this over here. I know what it looked like, just so we have some more room. So watch out for that minus sign here. But I got a 1 minus sine over a 1 plus sine. To get it to my common denominator, this guy is missing a 1 minus sine all over a 1 minus sine. Okay, now I got some double distributing to do. Make sure these guys get parentheses so we understand what's happening. Sometimes you can combine these together into a quantity squared. Sometimes you may need to double distribute them. I'm just going to double distribute them right now because that's how we're actually going to do this. So there's a 1, there's a sign, there's a sign. Okay, it's not sine squared, but it's plus 2 sine. Now the last piece is a sine squared. Okay, and be careful. I know you see this 1 and a sine squared, and you can, oh, that's a cosine squared, but it's a 1 plus sine squared. Okay. Now the bottom, since these are kind of conjugates, some stuff should cancel. So there's a 1, here's a sine, here's a minus sign, and lastly, there's a minus sine squared. So there's that first one. Second one here, make sure you're taking care of that negative sign with a big bracket up here. Okay, if anything's going to get you tripped up, it's going to be that. We do the same thing with a double distribute. So I'm going to do minus sign and minus sign for minus 2 signs. Lastly here, minus sign and minus sign is plus sine squared. All over common denominator here of 1 minus sine squared. Okay, so we look at this guy now. These guys canceled. Okay, so we do get that same common denominator down there. So if you want to put everything over a 1 minus sine squared, you can. And we start looking at the tops. Nothing we can do with this guy here, so we're just going to add it together right now. Now, we do have this minus, so we got to make sure that minus sign gets to all those places in there. Minus 1 plus 2 sine of theta and minus a sine squared. Okay? And with these, you're going to have to be using lots of paper. Keep things nice and neat. We have tons of scrap paper if you're worried about using your own. Okay? Now we look at the top here and we say, okay, 1 and a minus 1, those guys are going to cancel. Sine squared minus sine squared, those guys are going to cancel. 2 sine and 2 sine is 4 sine, not 4 sine squared. 1 minus a sine squared, I'm going to replace it with a cosine squared now. Okay? Nothing more I can really do here. Make sure you're not canceling this sine squared. I guess you guys can't see that. Make sure you're not canceling this sine squared with this guy up here. Okay? It's got to cancel out of everything, and you can't just take one out of there without, because it's part of this 1 here. Okay? So be careful of that. All right, this may look familiar to you guys now. 4 sine over a cosine squared. We go all the way back up to our original here. 4 tangent secant. Well, sine over a cosine times 1 over a cosine, and we have proved this guy. Okay. Here's some basic strategies you guys can look at. You don't have to have them all written down. You'll just get lots of practice in doing these and looking at the different types. But we're running out of time here, so you guys can pause this one and look at them so we don't have to go to a part 3. Come with questions.